there is a bit of historical context we need to understand what to glean from that first reading today. The prophet Isaiah is speaking to the kingdom of Judah at a time of great political tension. The Assyrian Empire to the north and the east was on the rise. To the south and the west was Egypt. And in the middle are all of these little kingdoms of Aram, Samaria, and Judah. And these two superpowers of Egypt and Assyria often played the smaller kingdoms between them off of one another. There were hosts of proxy wars and so on. It really is not all that different from what we see in the Middle East in this very time, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or between the United States and Russia, and how there's all of this jostling for control and power and influence. And so Judah finds itself now in the midst of this sort of proxy war, where Samaria and Aram are banding together. They're going to come down to Judah to sort of whip it into line so that they can present this front against one of the superpowers. And of course, the people of Judah are very, very anxious. And the temptation that faces the king is this: to whom is he going to turn for help? We will hear Isaiah saying to him, be faithful. That is, be faithful to God. Do not put your trust in Egypt to save you from Assyria. Do not put your trust in playing politics. Don't put your trust in the political jockeying for this position or influence over that. It is only the Lord who will be your shelter and your stay. Now, as we continue to hear the story unfolding, we will hear sadly that King Ahaz does not follow the prophet's advice, and much to his detriment and to the detriment of his kingdom. We also find that Jesus in the gospel is now criticizing these different cities in whom he had worked great wonders, great miracles. And he tells them, think of the most sinful, most scandalous places from the stories of the Scriptures. I'm telling you that if what I have done in your midst had been done in their midst, they would have repented. Or, again, remember that word in the Greek, the metanoia, doesn't just mean, putting sin out of your life. It means an opening up, an acceptance of God's plans. It requires an act of faith, an act of trust. We see how this is echoing now, what is happening in Isaiah's time. We commemorate today Blessed Catherine Tekakwitha, who in her own time lived in a situation where there was great political tension. She was a Mohawk, half Algonquin. She lived in a village not that far from here, up in Fonda, Orisville today. And she found herself the daughter of a Christian mother and a Mohawk chieftain who was right in the middle of tensions between the British and the French. And the Haudenosaunee nations were finding themselves caught in the middle of trade wars, proxy wars. And they had all sorts of questions. All right, to whom do we turn? On whom can we rely to preserve ourselves, to have security, to have prosperity? And St. Catherine sees through the midst of all of this tension, through all of this confusion, that the only way forward is in the Lord. Now, her decision does come at a great cost. And this is something we have to accept in the life of discipleship. That following the ways of the Lord does not mean that everything is easy. It doesn't mean that all of our problems or all the threats to us just sort of evaporate. What it means is that in the end, everything will work out. Ultimately, we will find salvation. But on the road there will be much hardship. And so Saint Kateri found. She had to leave her original home, go and live with an uncle for a while, but that wasn't safe enough, so she had to flee upwards toward the Canadian border, up into New France, where missionaries had established a village for all of the indigenous peoples who had converted to the faith. And it was there that she lived out the rest of her days, though there were comparatively few, as she died at the age of 24. We face today no fewer conundrums than did our ancestors in the faith. We are faced day in and day out with the question, will I trust God? Will I trust my job? Or will I trust the economy? Will I trust my education? Will I trust my spouse? Will I trust my family? Will I trust myself? As I face all of the myriad challenges and threats to my well-being, in whom ultimately will I trust? To whom or to where will I look for salvation? And there, in the list of possibilities, competing with the Lord, are any number of things. What we see over and over and over is that when we do not place our trust in the Lord, when we do not have faith, we may last for a time, we may be able to game the system for a time, but eventually it all falls apart. And although following the ways of the Lord may not be easy, it may be fraught with its own challenges and persecutions and sufferings and struggles, the Lord proves himself to us. He gives us signs along the way that we can trust him. And he calls us to open up our minds and our hearts to truly embrace his ways for us. To turn away from all of these false providers of security, all of these pretenders. Through the intercession of Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, may we have the faith, first of all, to follow in the ways God calls us. In the second place, the courage to persevere in